The gas lamps flickered along the cobblestone streets of Victorian London, casting more shadow than light. The fog rolled in thick, curling around the corners of buildings, seeping into alleyways where the gaslight could not reach. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, as if the streets themselves were listening. And in the distance, a faint, unplaceable sound carried over the mist, a soft laughter that no living soul could own. It began at the small estate on Grafton Street, a house that had stood for over half a century. The residents were simple, respectable people, bound by the rigid expectations of society. But that night the ordinary rules of reality seemed to slip. Doors creaked open without cause. Windows rattled though the wind was still. And in the snow outside, footprints appeared, too precise, too deliberate to belong to any human being, and yet impossible to trace. The first to notice was young Miss Eleanor Whitby, the daughter of the house. She had been walking to fetch a candle when the soft laughter reached her ears. It was not childlike, nor feminine, nor the sound of any animal she recognized. It was deliberate, chilling, mocking in a way that made her blood run cold. She paused, clutching the candle tightly, and the laughter stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the fog itself. Her father, Mr. Whitby, a man of rational thought and proper sensibilities, dismissed it at first. He blamed the fog, the wind, perhaps a trick of the imagination. Yet when he returned from inspecting the estate, he found the footprints in the snow leading from the gate to the back of the house. No sign of any intruder, no prints beyond the steps already made. They stopped as abruptly as they had begun, vanishing into the frost as though the world had swallowed them whole. Word of the strange events spread slowly, carried by whispers in the streets, cautious letters sent to neighbors, and hushed conversations in the dimly lit taverns. Soon it became clear that the Whitby estate was not alone in experiencing such phenomena. The surrounding area, once quiet and orderly, began to hum with rumor and dread. Strange occurrences in homes, unexplained sounds in the night, figures glimpsed in fog-laden streets, all pointing to something beyond the ordinary, something that did not belong to the realm of men. Detective Inspector Alistair Kane was called to investigate. He was a man known for his unyielding logic and keen attention to detail, yet even he hesitated as he walked the fog-choked streets that night. Kane examined every trace, every footprint, every whisper of sound, but the clues led him nowhere. It was as if the city itself were conspiring to hide the truth. And when he questioned witnesses, he found a curious pattern. Every person claimed to hear the laughter, yet none could describe its source or shape. Even the servants at the Whitby estate spoke of cold drafts where no window had been opened, of candles extinguishing mid-flame, of whispers that mimicked their own voices before vanishing. The most disturbing account came from the cook, Mrs. Hargreaves, who swore that dishes moved on their own in the kitchen, arranging themselves in patterns too precise to be accidental. "It knows us," she said, trembling. "It knows what we do before we do it." The events escalated over the following nights. Footsteps in snow became more intricate, forming impossible geometric shapes. The laughter grew louder, echoing across rooftops, entering homes through chimneys, and lingering in the very air that filled rooms. Some claimed they could feel eyes watching from corners where no one stood. Neighbors reported seeing shadowy figures vanish behind walls and doors, their presence hinted at only by the faintest movement of fog or the subtle creak of floorboards. And yet, amid the terror, a peculiar fascination took hold. Residents began keeping notes, diaries, and sketches of the unexplained, attempting to map the phenomena to capture the patterns. It became clear that the events were not random. There was intelligence behind them, a deliberate design. And somewhere in the midst of the fog, laughter, and footprints, the question arose that would haunt every mind it touched. What or who was orchestrating these horrors, and why? By the third week, the laughter had become almost constant. No one ventured out after dusk, and those who stayed inside reported strange occurrences even in daylight. Doors opened and closed of their own accord, objects moved without touch, and in the snow outside, the footprints began to form a circle, enclosing the estate as though marking it for something far greater than any human understanding. Inspector Kane, despite his steadfast logic, began to experience what others had feared. He heard voices speaking in his own tone, footsteps that mirrored his own across empty corridors, and the faintest hint of cold fingers brushing against his sleeve when no one was there. Rational explanations failed, and he began to suspect that the events were tied not merely to human malice or mischief, but to something older, something alive in the shadows of the Victorian streets. The climax of the events arrived on a particularly foggy night, when a scream shattered the usual cadence of whispers and laughter. Those who witnessed it spoke of an apparition appearing at the top of the estate's grand staircase, a figure dressed in Victorian finery, yet moving impossibly, its feet not touching the steps. Its face was obscured by shadow, yet every eye in the room felt its gaze. The laughter erupted once more, now mingled with a sound that was not human, a resonance that vibrated in the walls, the air, and the very minds of all present. By dawn, the figure had vanished. The snow outside bore no footprints, yet the pattern it left, the circle around the estate, remained intact. Inspector Kane's notes, hastily scribbled during the night, concluded with a chilling acknowledgement. Some events are beyond reason, beyond human comprehension, and perhaps beyond time itself. And though the fog eventually lifted, and the city returned to its daily rhythm, the estate and those who survived the nights carried a permanent unease. For the laughter was never truly gone. It lingered in whispered echoes, in corners of the fog, in shadows of gas lamps. And those who listened too closely could still hear it, faint but unmistakable, hinting at a secret that the Victorian era, and perhaps history itself, was not ready to reveal. The days that followed were marked by a strange duality. Life continued as if the estate were ordinary, servants tending to duties, the markets bustling, the gas lamps burning, yet an invisible thread of dread ran through every corner of the Whitby household. Meals were eaten in silence, voices hushed, and every shadow drew eyes as though it might suddenly spring to life. Miss Eleanor Whitby could no longer sleep without the candle burning at her side. Each night she imagined the laughter creeping into her room, curling around the walls like smoke. Sometimes, when the fog was particularly dense, she swore she could see faint shapes drifting past her window, figures in old-fashioned garb, faces blurred but smiling, vanishing as she blinked. Her father, despite his insistence on rationality, had begun walking the halls at night, checking doors, windows, and even the cellar, though each inspection revealed nothing. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The snow outside retained the impossible footprints, circling the estate with a precision that no human, or even animal, could achieve. Each morning, the patterns were slightly altered, subtly reshaped as if someone, or something, was testing the boundaries of their reality. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about strange lights at night, windows opening when no one lived in the house, and laughter echoing across empty streets. The city, usually orderly and disciplined, seemed to pulse with a hidden rhythm that only the estate and its immediate surroundings were aware of. Inspector Kane, summoned repeatedly, kept meticulous notes, attempting to quantify the impossible. He compared patterns in the snow, mapped reported sightings, and documented witness accounts, but for every observation recorded, 10 more anomalies appeared. One evening, he discovered a hidden attic above the main hall, accessible only through a narrow, spiraling staircase that had never been mentioned in the household plans. Within, he found faint symbols etched into the walls, circles intertwined with lines, spirals that seemed to repeat themselves infinitely. He could not determine their origin, but the sense of being watched was immediate and oppressive. Meanwhile, the servants began reporting dreams, all disturbingly similar. They dreamed of the estate engulfed in fog, of shapes circling in the darkness, of laughter echoing endlessly. Each dream left them trembling upon waking, convinced that the entity outside the veil of normalcy was reaching into their minds. The household doctor, a man of science, attempted to dismiss these accounts as hysteria, yet even he admitted to hearing whispers in the night, soft at first and then growing insistent, echoing through the empty corridors. Then came the night of the footprints. Heavy snow had fallen, blanketing the streets in white silence. The family, uneasy as ever, retired early, hoping the winter night might bring peace. At midnight, Eleanor awoke to a sound like the dragging of feet, soft, deliberate, measured. She followed it to the front hall and gasped. The snow outside was alive with movement. Footprints appeared and vanished simultaneously, forming impossible shapes, lines intersecting at angles that defied geometry. At the center of it all, the outline of a figure emerged, only to dissolve like mist under the lamp's flickering light. Eleanor's scream brought her father and the servants running, but when they opened the door, the snow was as untouched as it had been hours before. Yet, when they looked closer, subtle impressions remained, tiny depressions in the snow that formed a perfect circle, enclosing the estate. It was a boundary, invisible to the eye yet undeniably present, as if the estate had become a stage for something larger, something beyond comprehension. Inspector Kane arrived within the hour, examining the snow and the traces with the diligence of a man determined to impose order upon chaos. He felt it too, the sense that the estate itself was no longer part of the ordinary world. The boundary extended beyond walls, fences, and streets. It existed in space and mind alike. Every corner, every shadow, every flicker of gaslight seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then the laughter returned. It was louder now, more insistent, echoing as though it originated both inside and outside the house simultaneously. The gas lamps flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows. Objects trembled on shelves, doors rattled on their hinges, and a chill wind swept through the hall despite every window being closed. The figure in the snow, if it had been seen at all, had vanished, leaving only the imprint of fear in those present. Questions proliferated. Was it a ghost of the past? A supernatural manifestation tied to a crime long buried? Or something far stranger, something older than the city itself? Each investigation brought no answers, only further mysteries. Every rational explanation collapsed under the weight of accumulated anomalies. The estate, once a haven of ordinary life, had become a nexus of paradox. Reality itself seemed to bend, a living puzzle that refused to yield. Footsteps, laughter, shadows, impossible marks in snow, each piece hinted at a truth both fascinating and terrifying. And as Inspector Kane pored over his notes, a thought seized him with icy certainty. They were not merely witnessing events. They were part of them. The story had only begun. Days turned into a week, yet the estate remained under the silent rule of its unseen visitor. Eleanor Whitby began to notice patterns in the disturbances, the flickering of the lamps, the positioning of shadows, the cadence of the laughter. It was not random. Someone or something was deliberate, measuring, testing, perhaps even communicating. She started keeping a journal, recording each occurrence with painstaking detail. The exact time, the angle of the light, the shape of footprints in the snow, the temperature shifts in rooms that had no draft. Her father observed her notes with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You are mapping the impossible," he said one evening, peering over her shoulder at the pages. "And yet, these details, they make sense in a way I cannot understand." But even he could not dismiss the growing feeling of menace that hovered over the household. Servants refused to go into the basement, claiming that whispers called to them from the darkness, coaxing them to step where no sane person would tread. Inspector Kane returned, this time with a small team of assistants and an assortment of instruments, barometers, thermometers, even early photographic equipment. He attempted to capture the phenomena, to document the impossible scientifically. Yet every measurement, every attempt at observation, seemed to falter the moment he turned his eyes away. Candles extinguished before he could note the temperature drop. Shadows shifted before they could be photographed. The faint, Mocking laughter seemed to anticipate their presence and retreat just out of reach. On the eighth night, a breakthrough or a horror occurred. Eleanor awoke to find the figure in the snow again, but this time it moved with purpose. It circled the estate, leaving marks that traced patterns reminiscent of Victorian architectural plans, yet warped, impossible, almost fractal in design. When Kane and the others arrived, they found the snow's surface intact but with a single line of footprints leading to the cellar door, a door that had never been used in the recorded history of the house. Reluctantly, they descended. The air grew colder with each step, heavy and damp, carrying a faint metallic scent. At the bottom, the cellar was larger than architectural records suggested, stretching into shadows that defied logic. There they found a collection of artifacts, letters written in a spidery hand, cryptic symbols etched into the walls, and an assortment of objects, some mundane, some bizarre, that seemed out of place and out of time. One letter in particular caught Kane's attention. It referenced an event that must never be spoken, for the laughter knows all who speak it aloud. The language was archaic, filled with warnings and riddles. Eleanor, trembling, read aloud passages that seemed to twist the air itself. And then the laughter returned, closer, louder, now seeming to come from within the very walls of the cellar. Panic gripped the group. Candles flickered violently, their flames bending as if caught in an invisible wind. Objects trembled on tables and shelves, sliding across surfaces as though pushed by unseen hands. And then, silence. A silence so complete it seemed to press against their ears and throats, leaving only the sound of their own hearts beating. When Kane finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Whatever this is, it is not of our world. It is something older, something patient, something sentient." Eleanor's eyes widened in understanding. The estate itself was a vessel, a stage for forces beyond comprehension, its halls and rooms shaped by presence rather than architecture. The following days were marked by careful observation and documentation. But the disturbances grew bolder. Furniture shifted to block doorways, portraits tilted to watch intruders, and shadows gathered in corners of rooms where no light should reach. The laughter became almost conversational, mimicking voices, even repeating phrases overheard from the living. Kane began to suspect that whatever haunted the Whitby estate was learning, adapting, and perhaps even feeding on their fear. By the third week, the neighborhood had begun to whisper of the estate. Children dared not play nearby. Adults crossed the street to avoid the fog-choked alley leading to the property. Yet the phenomena were confined to the estate itself and its immediate surroundings. Observers noted that the air above the house shimmered faintly, as if reality itself were strained, bending over the property in a way that resisted rational explanation. Then came the final, inexplicable night. Eleanor awoke to a scream, not hers, not any human she recognized. It resonated through the estate like a physical force. Kane and the assistants rushed to the sound, finding the great hall empty, yet imprinted in the snow visible through the windows. A massive spiral pattern that seemed impossibly large, extending beyond the known property lines. From its center the laughter emanated, low and insistent, echoing across time and space. No one would step closer. The pattern, the laughter, the impossible geometry of the snow, it was all a message, or perhaps a warning. Eleanor understood finally that the estate itself was alive in some way, a nexus between reality and something darker, older, and infinitely patient. And as dawn broke over Victorian London, casting pale light over the fog, the estate remained intact, silent, yet watched. The laughter had vanished. The footprints disappeared, but the presence lingered. Those who had survived would never forget it, for they had glimpsed something at the edge of understanding, a force that obeyed no logic, no law, no human rule. They had learned a singular truth. Some mysteries are eternal, and some horrors, no matter how carefully ignored, are never truly gone. Days passed after the final spiral in the snow, yet the Whitby estate remained a magnet for unease. The servants whispered among themselves, eyes darting to every shadow. Eleanor could not sleep, haunted by visions of the figure in the snow, its shape shifting each time she closed her eyes. Every candle flicker became a threat, every draft a sinister presence. Even Mr. Whitby, once a pillar of reason, had begun pacing the hallways in the dead of night, muttering about impossible angles and figures moving just beyond sight. Inspector Kane returned, this time with specialized instruments for measuring sound, air pressure, and temperature. He sought to catch the phenomenon scientifically, but each attempt only deepened the mystery. Thermometers registered extreme drops, yet the fireplace blazed. Barometers fluctuated wildly, yet the air was still. And the faint, mocking laughter returned unpredictably, echoing across empty halls with no source. His assistants began keeping journals, each entry more disturbed than the last, documenting visions, chills, and sounds that could not be explained. Then came the night of the mirror. Eleanor, unable to sleep, wandered into the drawing room. The grand mirror, untouched for decades, reflected not her own image but the faint silhouette of a man in Victorian garb, standing behind her. When she spun around, the room was empty. The reflection, however, remained, its form blurred and flickering, as if caught between this world and another. She screamed, bringing her father and Kane to her side, but when Kane inspected the mirror, it reflected only the three of them. Despite their fear, they were compelled to investigate further. In the library, they discovered an old journal, hidden in a false compartment behind a bookshelf. The journal belonged to a previous owner, long deceased, and its pages described rituals, secret societies, and experiments conducted within the estate. Some entries mentioned attempts to contact forces beyond the natural world and the repeated phrase, "The laughter watches and it learns." The events escalated rapidly. Candles blew out simultaneously in every room, doors slammed shut, and objects rose from shelves as if gravity itself had been reversed. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors, and the cold became unbearable, freezing the air in icy swirls that clung to skin. Kane theorized that the house might be a focal point for a supernatural phenomenon, a junction where the living and something else intersected. One night, Eleanor awoke to a whisper, so clear it seemed to come from inside her own mind. It spoke her name, beckoning her toward the attic where she discovered a hidden chamber. Inside were symbols etched deep into the walls, and in the center of the room, a circle of old, cracked candle stubs. The air was heavy, suffused with an energy she could feel pressing on her chest. The laughter, now unmistakable, echoed from every corner of the chamber, growing louder and closer with each heartbeat. The climax approached when the team decided to confront the entity, if such it was, directly. Armed with lanterns, candles, and courage, they entered the great hall at midnight. The room was filled with fog, denser than any they had seen, and the temperature dropped drastically. Shadows stretched unnaturally along walls, forming shapes that seemed to move independently. And then, in the center, the figure appeared. Indistinct, yet unmistakably human in posture, yet flickering in and out of existence, as though reality itself could not contain it. The laughter surrounded them, no longer soft but deafening, bouncing off walls and ceilings, filling the entire house with its malevolent cadence. They tried to communicate, asking questions, demanding answers, but the entity only observed, its presence oppressive and intelligent. Kane recorded everything, knowing that the phenomenon defied logic and that any attempt to rationalize it fell short. By dawn, the figure was gone, the fog lifted, and the estate returned to a deceptive calm. But nothing would ever be the same. Eleanor, her father, and Kane knew that the house was alive in a way beyond human understanding, that it retained memories of those who entered, shaping itself in response to their fear. The laughter had ceased, but its imprint remained, a silent echo in every room, every shadow, every corner of the estate. The Whitby Estate stood as a monument to the unknowable, a place where true crime, paranormal activity, and human curiosity intersected. The events were never fully explained, and the city itself seemed to acknowledge the estate's abnormality with silence and caution. Those who ventured near it in later years reported a subtle tension in the air, a feeling that eyes followed them, and a whispering sound carried on the fog, faint but unmistakable. Inspector Kane's reports remained incomplete, yet they served as testimony to something the Victorian era could neither name nor rationalize. And Eleanor's journals, preserved carefully, detailed the months of terror, insight, and strange observation that confirmed a terrifying truth. Some phenomena exist beyond reason, waiting patiently for those who dare to notice. Even today, if one walks the foggy streets near the old Whitby Estate, the faintest echo of laughter can still be heard, and shadows may twitch where no light reaches. The Victorian mystery remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that not all history can be explained, and not all evil is recorded in books. Weeks turned into months, yet the estate remained a focal point of unexplainable events. The Whitby family tried to resume some semblance of normal life, but it was impossible. Eleanor often found herself staring into mirrors, half expecting the shadowy figure to appear again. The servants moved cautiously through the halls, their eyes constantly scanning corners and ceilings. Even the wind seemed different here, carrying a whispering hum that never fully dissipated. Inspector Kane, now a frequent visitor, documented each new occurrence. He noticed subtle changes in the house, furniture subtly rearranged, objects shifted in ways no human hand could manage, and the very air seemed to thrum with anticipation. He speculated that the estate was some sort of psychological trap, or perhaps even a locus for something that could bend perception itself. Yet, rational explanations failed him, and he began to fear what the estate might do to him if he pressed too far. One cold evening, as the fog rolled thick across the streets, Eleanor ventured into the garden alone. The snow had melted in parts, revealing patches of frost and ground scorched in places where no fire could have touched. She noticed footprints forming again, but this time they were not human, nor did they resemble animal tracks. They twisted and turned in impossible geometries, spiraling outward like a map to some unseen destination. As she stepped closer, the faint sound of the laughter returned, soft at first, then rising, echoing across the estate and beyond into the foggy streets. Eleanor froze, feeling a presence behind her. Slowly she turned and glimpsed the figure, not fully visible but a dark silhouette hovering just beyond the garden wall. Its eyes seemed to burn faintly, unblinking, intelligent. It did not move toward her. It did not flee. It observed, patiently, almost as if assessing her courage or perhaps measuring her fear. The figure dissipated into the mist before she could step closer, leaving only the echo of laughter and the spiraling footprints fading into the frost. Inside, Mr. Whitby discovered another hidden chamber, this one beneath the drawing room. Accessed through a false panel, it contained relics from centuries past, worn books with cryptic symbols, ritual implements, and notes that seemed centuries old. Many were written in languages Kane could not identify. Eleanor handled them carefully, feeling as if the pages themselves carried some latent energy. The words were incomprehensible, yet certain phrases seemed to pulse faintly when read aloud, resonating in the air with a hum that made the hairs on her arms stand. As the nights passed, the disturbances intensified. Candles would flare and die as if the flame itself resisted existence. Footsteps echoed in unoccupied rooms, and laughter grew louder and more distinct, now mimicking voices from the estate's history. Past residents, servants, and even strangers who had never been near the property. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching along hallways and ceilings, sometimes forming humanoid shapes, then collapsing into the floor as though reality itself were unstable. Kane became increasingly obsessed with documenting everything. He installed makeshift recording devices of the era, tuned springs, early acoustic recording experiments, and careful notes. He theorized that some intelligence was attempting communication, using the estate itself as a medium. Each investigation revealed further anomalies, objects that moved when unobserved, lights that flickered in impossible sequences, and sounds that originated in no single location but seemed omnipresent. One stormy night, Eleanor awoke to find the figure standing at the end of her bed. Its form was clearer this time. A Victorian gentleman, face pale and hollow-eyed, mouth twisted in a silent grin. She screamed, and the figure vanished instantly. When Kane arrived, he found no evidence, but noticed that the room's temperature had dropped several degrees, frost forming along the window panes despite the fire in the hearth. The climax of the supernatural events unfolded during the first snowfall of the season. The estate was encircled by intricate patterns in the snow, each more elaborate than the last. Kane, Eleanor, and the remaining household members followed the traces, which led them to the attic chamber. Inside, the symbols etched into the walls seemed to pulse faintly with a cold light. The laughter was deafening, surrounding them from all directions, vibrating in the walls and floors. Suddenly, the figure appeared in the center of the room, now fully formed yet flickering between visibility and shadow. It spoke, though not with words as humans knew them, but with a resonance that filled the mind rather than the ears. Thoughts, fears, and memories were drawn out, mirrored back, and twisted in ways the living could barely comprehend. Each person experienced the encounter differently. Some saw visions of their past, others glimpsed impossible futures, and all felt the overwhelming weight of an intelligence older than the city itself. By dawn, the figure had vanished. The attic was empty, the chamber still. The snow outside was pristine, but Kane noted faint impressions leading into the mist, disappearing as if swallowed by reality itself. The estate remained a nexus of fear and fascination, a place where true crime, Victorian curiosity, and the paranormal converged. Eleanor kept her journals, documenting every detail, every shadow, every whisper, convinced that understanding, even partially, was better than ignoring the truth. Kane returned to London, his reports incomplete, filled with cautionary notes and questions with no answers. The estate was left intact but forever changed. Visitors in later years reported hearing faint laughter in the fog, shadows moving where no one could be, and snow forming strange, impossible patterns around the estate. The story of the Whitby Estate persisted, whispered among Victorian historians, occult enthusiasts, and the curious who wandered too close to the fog-laden streets. Some say the laughter still waits for those who dare to enter, echoing through time, a reminder that some mysteries are eternal, some phenomena beyond reason, and some terrors are never fully recorded in history.